Whenever people talk about the conflict between science and faith, sooner or later they mention Galileo. Everyone knows the legend, how Galileo fearlessly stood up for the truth and the Christian Church persecuted him for his scientific discoveries. But the reality isn't so simple.
Galileo was trying to get the Church to accept the Copernican theory as a fact. He pushes this, it becomes increasingly insulting towards many people who were more conservative. Bearing in mind at the same time Johannes Kepler, a Lutheran working in Catholic Germany, was also a Copernican and never gets into any trouble whatsoever because he is not being insulting to people. Always bear in mind, if you want to win friends, don't call them nasty things. Galileo had a knack of calling them nasty things. Galileo moves amongst princes, high-powered academics, cardinals, bishops, and is applauded. He also makes enemies, but the enemies he makes are not theological. They are academics. They are disciples of the philosophy of Aristotle. Those who suggested that the earth is central and so on, who are themselves disciples of Greek pagan thinking, to put it bluntly. But what happens is that Galileo's offensiveness to them basically gets people rather sick of him.
Galileo had a knack for making enemies. He was an arrogant man, often could not grant any validity to a point of view other than his own. And he was fond of making fun of those who differed with him on important issues. For example, much earlier in his career, he had gotten into a bitter dispute over sunspots, over who discovered them first and what they meant. And his opponent in that dispute was a Jesuit priest named Christoph Scheiner, who was also a leading astronomer of the day. Scheiner came away from this with a very bad taste in his mouth, and many of his Jesuit friends sympathized, understandably, with Scheiner, so that when Galileo came down to the point at which he was in direct conflict with the Pope over this book he had written, he didn't have any friends among the Jesuit astronomers, who otherwise might have been quite influential on his behalf. He also made enemies of many other people in the course of his life, some of them having nothing to do with the Church whatsoever, such as professors of philosophy at various Italian universities. He was so unpopular, in fact, in his first teaching appointment at the University of Pisa, that he knew he wasn't going to get tenure. And for that reason, he sought employment elsewhere. He ended up going over to another country in those days, over to the Republic of Venice, and he taught at Padua.
You've only got to look at a portrait of Galileo, which is available on the internet, actually. So the original is in the National Maritime Museum in London. It's by the younger Tintoretto, Domenico Tintoretto. And it shows Galileo at the age of about 40. It's dated 1606-7, something like that. When Galileo's just early 40s. He has a face on that picture, as my dear wife Rachel says, I wouldn't like to meet him on a dark night. He looks as hard a thug as you would ever imagine. There he is, black suit, small white frill collar, close crimped hair, wearing the fashionable earring of a gentleman about town of those days, and a look on his face which would more or less say, cross me, mate, and I'll cut your throat. Now this is Galileo, who actually starts the trouble. Galileo, not the popular image of the poor old frail man with the beard. That's a Galileo of 30, 40 years later nearly. Look at the Galileo when he's really hetting up. It's Galileo who looks rather like a street thug. So therefore, when we look at the so-called trial and persecution of Galileo, don't go back to the Mickey Mouse history books. Go to the real history books. There you will find a different story. And there you will find, in spite of his abusive language, his thuggish appearance and all the rest of it, Galileo nonetheless lived and died a good conforming Christian. But again, if you want to really know the background, look at Galileo himself. I don't think many people who had dealings with Galileo in his time, or if he were alive today, would find him that easy company. Galileo was provocative, he was pushy, deeply ambitious, and would lay into people verbally, often with very little provocation.
In the modern myth, the Galileo affair is a conflict between science and faith. The reality is much more complicated. It involved the clash of personalities, and, as we'll see next time, Galileo was also caught up in the politics of his day.